to be here with all of you tonight and to share a little bit about what God did in Argentina. I'm trying to pull up some of my notes. So yes, we went to Argentina for about 10 days with travel and everything. It was 12 days total. This location that we're at here was one of the first day. We landed in the morning, we got unpacked, we went to check in, and then we just headed to see a couple of the sites before we went to bed that night. So this area is called La Boca, which in Spanish means the mouth. I don't know why it's called that, but it is. And the man who grew up here was a very poor neighborhood, very run down. And I don't remember, do you remember why he became famous? Somehow he became famous, probably a soccer player or something. And wanted to make this place more happy and appealing, so he paid to paint everything these really bright colors so that when he returned it was more happy and more uplifting. And this was just one street. There were multiple streets that were painted like this. So this is not, what would I say, like all of Argentina doesn't necessarily look like this. This was just one particular area that was very beautiful and very colorful. So we began the next day at Hogar de Quilmes, which is the home in Quilmes. Quilmes is a town, and this particular orphanage was started back in the late 1800s when somebody left a baby on some missionary's doorstep, and they didn't know where this baby came from, but realized that this was not the only child in their area that needed help. And so that started this orphanage. They were missionaries from England, I believe. And so they, within just a couple of years, had a large number of children. And then as the years progressed, I think they were, was it them? No, it was the other one that was celebrating the anniversary, yeah. So I don't remember how many years they've been in, but since 1880s, somewhere in there, they've been serving children. Somewhere along the way, things changed government-wise as how children are dealt with, so now it's more like what we would consider foster care. So most of the children there actually have parents, but they've been removed from the home. And so when we were there, I think there were 19 children in the home. And the first day, we did not work with the children other than just about 10 to 15 minutes playing with them outside. We did a lot of work like what you see here. We're sorting through donations to just help them clean out some cabinets. We cleaned out their library. We did several different things. So you can see the guys were like taking care of, you see that monitor that Ace is carrying is like, you don't really even see those kind of monitors anymore. So they were getting rid of some old computer equipment. Sharon and I are going through a ton of maps. I actually kept some of these maps because I thought they were really cool and they were wanting to get rid of them. So we cleaned out their library, we cleaned out old computer equipment, and just really helped them to do some things. So the director had never received a team before. So they have had some local volunteers come every couple of a little while, but it tends to disrupt their schedule with the kids, so they've been a little hesitant to have teams come in for a long time. And so, but our contact on the ground just told them, like, this will be such a blessing for you, it'll be a blessing for them. This is part of being the church, is letting all of us serve each other. And so she said, okay, we'll do it. And so we knew going in that this was a new thing for her as well as for the orphanage, and so we wanted to do whatever we could to serve. She told us afterwards, she said, if you ever want to come back, please come back. You're always welcome. And she said, I'm so appreciative of the work you did on the first day, because that would have taken me a long time. Like, I would have had to do all of that myself. And so it just reminded me of the verse in Hebrews that says, don't forget to do good and share what you have, because God is pleased with these kinds of sacrifices. So it was just a way to go and be the church in the hands and feet of Jesus, to her, but also to the children there. And so we actually wished that there was more we could do in this way, but because she wasn't used to hosting teams, like we did everything and more than what she had planned for us to do. And so hopefully next time we go, she'll have a little bit better idea of how much we can accomplish, and then maybe have even more projects lined up for us. So, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so then the next day after that, we would work with the kids. As you can see, we have a program that we would do. We do crafts with them. We would do a Bible story. The first day we did Daniel in the Lion's Den, and then we would act it out in a skit. But before we did all that, we just kind of got to know the kids, and I think I had more kids on my shoulders than I ever had before. Everybody kept coming up to me, and I would put them on my shoulder. I was a little sore after that, but it was very good. It was very hard because we couldn't understand what they were saying. They would just come up to you and say all these things, and you were like, no, English. But it was good, and I think they were very happy that we were there. And I'll let you go ahead on.
So the picture on the, I don't know what it is for you, on your left, yeah. So the little boy that's holding onto her hand, when we did the Daniel and the Lion's Den skit, Asa played the king, and he wore a great big woolly hair and beard, and he scared this kid to death. When Asa came in, he just started screaming and ran to one of the tias. So tia in Spanish is aunt, and those are the caretakers. They actually called us tia and tio, which means aunt and uncle, is what they called all of us. But yes, he was so scared. I don't know if maybe it was a little sad because you don't know if there's someone in his past that maybe that reminded him of, or if it just, I don't know, some kids don't like puppets, right? Maybe it was just something just freaked him out. So the next day we were like, do not wear the wig. I don't remember what we were doing the next day, but we were like, oh, it was the prodigal son, right? And so the father, usually for the prodigal son skit, we will have the father wear the wig and the beard, and we were like, no, none of that, because that freaks that kid out. And then on the picture with me, that little kid, his name is Christian. And he was my little buddy for a couple of days, loved playing with my bracelet. I had to keep an eye on it because sometimes he would put it on and I wasn't quite sure if he was going to return it. But he was 7 years old, so I'd ask him, how old are you? He's like, siete. And so we were having a conversation. They had me sitting with him at one of the tables for lunch. And he was telling me very animatedly this story, and he was gesticulating, putting things under his coat. And the translator that was sitting there, I could tell like he was a little concerned, and then I could tell he was like, kind of remonstrating with him. And then he said to me, yeah, he was just telling you that he went to the store and stole some yogurt, and he hid it under his coat and took it out, and no one ever knew. And like when he was telling it, he was very proud of himself. Like, you could tell like he was excited that he was able to do that. And he said, but I was telling him like, no, that's not good. Like, you don't need to do that. You don't need to think that that's a good thing. That's not a good thing. And so it just, it made it very clear, right, what the kind of homes these kids have grown up in. I'm just wondering, had someone told him to do that, or had he seen someone else do it, that he wanted to emulate that? And so, as we spent the next couple of 3 days with these kids, you notice that very, starkly, how much they didn't have a sustaining, steady presence in their life that was going to teach them right and wrong. And so hopefully being in this home, most of them were new to this home and had only been there for a couple of weeks. And it is a Christian home. They're run by evangelical Christians who are going to teach them about what it means to follow Jesus. But of course, as we know, each one of these kids is going to have to make that decision for themselves. And so we did have, when we went into doing some of the games, so here Asa and some of the team are playing telephone. I think you guys were playing telephone. And it was trying to illustrate how to listen to God's voice, to be very clear and hear what he's saying. Then they were playing North South Central, I think is the one on the right there where Asa is with the little girl, which again is to try and hear God's voice. Don't watch what other people are doing. Don't watch what you can see, but rather go what you can hear. So, and this is the day we left, and all the kids got in on a picture with us with our flag, and so it was a really, really great experience. I was able to share the gospel with all of them with the muddy glove object lesson, which we made very clear. We also talked about it in the prodigal son skit, and Asa did a little thing with pennies on becoming a new creation in Christ. And so that whole last day, we were very intentional about sharing the gospel with them. They were all listening very well. Whenever I did the skit, I did ask, you know, what are some of the 10 commandments? Do you know any of the 10 commandments? And none of them knew. They never heard about it. And so it just made it very clear. And the lady who ran, the director, she told us afterwards, she said, most of these kids are new and they actually don't know any of this stuff. So she was very appreciative that we were sharing the gospel and also just sharing God's love in the ways that we were showing. You can see some of the kids have Polaroids in their hands, especially the ones on the floor. So we did that the last day, and they were all super excited to get a Polaroid picture of themselves. And at least two, I think there were one or two of these kids that the director, she's all the way on the right in the white kneeling down. That's the director, her name is Sabrina. Was it Sabrina? Yeah. And she told us that at least two of the kids that they have no pictures of them. When they got them, there were no pictures in their stuff. So she said, we're so thankful that you took these pictures because they don't even have any right now. So yeah, it was a really, really great experience.
Yeah, and I would just say saying goodbye was very tough because these kids get so attached, not having any family except for the kids they're around. And there was one girl who was just weeping by the end. And I haven't cried on a mission trip before, but I did this time. And I took comfort in the fact that they are with godly people and people who listen to Christ.
Yeah. We did get to make s'mores with them, which was really fun. So they were celebrating a holiday the second day we were there, which was when they declared independence from Spain. So in May, I think it was May 26th or May 27th, they declared independence from Spain sometime back in, 1902 or something. And then it took them like 3 years to win their independence, and they declared that in August. So those 2 days are like really big days for them. And so they taught us to make pastelitos, which is a little pastry thing. And so they showed us how to make them and bake them. And then Jose, the one who helped us set up the trip, had said, why don't you guys bring stuff for s'mores so you can help them learn how to make an American, dessert. And so the kids loved them. They thought they were good. But the funniest part about that was the lady in the kitchen. She was probably in her 50s. And she was just excited as all get out to make a s'more.
She ate 4.
Yeah, she did. She ate 4 s'mores, and she was like over there roasting her marshmallows and taking selfies, and just she tasted it. She was like, she just like loved that whole process. So it was fun even just to like minister to someone like that as well. I think it was something she had heard of all her life and just like was so excited to do that. We had s'more makings left over, and so we left them with them, and they wrapped them all up and put them in the freezer so they could do it again at some other point. So that was really fun. Okay, so next we headed to Leloir Church, which is a church plant about an hour and a half away from where we were staying. The church planters are from Ecuador, actually, a man and his wife, and they've been there since 2009, I believe, and have a very good, healthy church going. This is one of my favorite churches ever to visit in all of my travels, just because of the love the people had for each other and just their welcoming spirit and just seeing and feeling the Spirit of the Lord in that church. So on Saturday, we did a kids program, which is what we're doing here. We're actually singing I've Got the Joy, Joy, Joy in My Heart in Spanish. And I don't know how the other people did. I've done it before in Spanish, so it was pretty easy for me. But
They said like every other word.
but they all seemed to enjoy it. So we did a kids program in the morning, and then they made a big Argentinian barbecue for us in the afternoon, and that was really good. It's amazing. Like you could smell it for hours first, and then when you finally got to eat it, it was really good. But I'll let Lisa share a little bit.
Yeah, working with these kids was just a very stark difference from working with the orphanage kids. They were very unruly. They didn't really like to pay attention. Coming here and doing the same program that we did at the orphanage, it was just so much different. And talking about it later, we were saying like, this is the difference that it makes when you have a parent in the home, right? That like invests in their kid is they were still just as rowdy and like wild, but they were kept like under control because their parents were with them and present. And doing the program was like smooth sailing, and yeah, it was just very, very neat to see.
Yeah, so after we did the program, we had our barbecue, and then they divided us up into small groups, and we went into people's homes and heard their stories. And so Rachel and Karis and myself went to this home here, and so the guy on the far right is the gentleman that told us his testimony. His wife is standing right next to me holding the little baby, and they are immigrants from Peru, and only accepted Christ about a year to 18 months ago. And it was interesting, both homes that we visited this day talked about just feeling a uselessness of life. What is life for? What am I doing all this for? What does this lead to? And then, so the wife started seeking first, and the woman standing all the way to the far left had some sort of interaction with her and asked her to come to church. And so eventually she did, and really enjoyed it. And then she told her husband, you should come also. And so they both went, and the guy that has his arm around the guy on the far right is her husband. So the lady on the far left and the guy in the striped shirt, they're married, and they were investing in this young couple from Peru to get them to come to church and to tell them about Christ and to witness to them. And after a few months, he accepted Christ first, and then she accepted Christ a couple of weeks later. And he just, you can see the joy on his face when he talked about accepting Christ and just how it changed everything in his life, and gave him purpose and a sense of worth. And they had been together for, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think he said 18 years, but had never married. But had been together that long and had immigrated from Peru together. They had a son who was 17. And of course, not long after accepting Christ, they began to feel the need to get married, right? So they got married, and they have 2 younger children as well, and then the baby is the youngest one. And so you just saw the fruits of God's work in their life as they talked about how he was changing them and moving them. And so they sat there and told us all their story. The gentleman who was investing in him, like he said, this is my disciple. You know, this is my disciple. And I loved that he would call him that he was discipling him, right? And I was like, we need to start using this language in the U.S. This is my disciple. And so he is from Venezuela. And then his wife, who's on the far left, is from Colombia. And so in this room, we had Peruvians, Venezuelans, Colombians, Argentinians, and Americans. So we had 5 different nationalities represented in this room, which made me think, and I said it here, I said, guys, this is just like a little taste of heaven right here, because in Revelation 7:9, it says, there was before me a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. And they're all giving honor and glory to the King. And it's just a little bit of taste of that here when you sit in a room like this and hear all the different people telling their stories and saying, this is what God did in my life. And so it was really exciting to see that. It's funny because we were in Argentina, and in this picture, only our translator, which he's right beside me, and the blue, and then the little baby, those were the only 2 people that were Argentinian. So that was fun to be there. But definitely like them taking us into their homes, reminding me of Romans 12, where it says, contribute to the needs of God's people and welcome strangers into your home, because they did this for us. 2 different days. They did it this day, and then the next day after we went to church, they took us into their homes to feed us a meal. And it reminded me of something I read once that said, you know, it's interesting that people who've never met can travel all over the world, and you meet someone and it's like you've known them for your whole life, right? There's that bond there in Christ that you don't have to sit down and get to know them without feeling a kinship to them, right? And in Hebrews it says to not neglect meeting together, but encourage one another, the more as you see the day drawing near. And then in Ephesians it says, we are no longer strangers and aliens, which you feel like in a foreign country, right? You feel like a stranger and an alien. But he says, you're no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. And so definitely doing these visits to people we've never met before, but we had this bond in the faith, was just super uplifting. We got back and got in the bus for the drive back to our hotel, which is like an hour and a half away, and the bus just never stopped. It was like talking, like the whole time. And I turned to Sharon, who is one of my co-leaders, and I said, this is one of the things I love about mission trips, is getting on the bus and just seeing our students so excited and so animated. They were all just having to share their stories about what had happened to them and what they had experienced. And so that's one of the things that I just love about taking students on these trips and giving them different experiences in the Lord.
Yeah, and so I went to a different house that day, 2 different houses, but the main thing that stuck out to me was after they had shared their testimony with us, they would want us to share prayer requests that we had, and then they would share with us, and then we would pray for each other. And that was something that really impacted me. I had a lot of things on my mind that day, and I was able to tell them, and then we just prayed together, and we'd only known each other for like 30 minutes. And that was something that was just very, very nice, something very nice.
Yeah, the next day I went to a different home for lunch, and one of the men, the father of the family, shared that he was needing a knee replacement, I think. But with their healthcare system there, he has to wait for approval to even begin that process from the government. And as all governments are, they move very slowly. And then even after approval, it was going to take a lot more. So he was hoping to have a new knee within 2 years, but having to deal with that before, and, in the meantime. They also shared concern about their son, who's not a Christian, and who is on substances and abusing those. And so I just took the time and I prayed a very long prayer, and I had to remain very focused because he was crying through the entire prayer, right? And so it's just amazing how your prayers can affect people. I was not praying in Spanish, but it was being translated. So yes, the power of prayer between believers is amazing. The next morning, we went to church. Our bus driver was late because of traffic, and we thought we were going to walk in late. And we did walk in late, but they hadn't started yet, which is common for Latin cultures, Latin American cultures. And I kind of figured that. I was like, well, we may show up late, but we'll probably be fine. But it was fun to go in because all the people we had visited the day before were just like, oh, welcome, come sit with me, and just really excited to see us there. We spread out in different groups around the church, and we each had a translator with us. And then after service was over, they called us up to the front, which is what this picture is here. The one speaking, his name is Jaden, and next to him is his wife, Taylor. And for those first 4 to 5 days while we were working at the first orphanage and then also working with this church, they actually stayed with the pastor and his wife, lived in their home, and did all of the work that they were doing as church planners. As I mentioned, they were from Ecuador, and so Jaden and Taylor have surrendered to full-time mission work overseas as church planters, and they feel a call to Thailand, but they wanted to learn from someone else, and so we were able to set this up where they could go and live with them and learn from them. And from what I heard from both sides, it was a mutual blessing and encouragement to both couples. We were in contact with them during the days we were separated, but hadn't had time to talk a lot. And whenever we went to say goodbye later that afternoon, Taylor, who's the wife, started crying, and I was like, oh, good. It was a good experience because she has like some ties here, and it's hard for her to leave, So it was good to see that. And Jaden did tell me later, he said, yeah, if we didn't already have a call to Thailand, I think we would be coming here. So it really did impact them, and that was amazing to see that happen. This is when we had our last picture after having church and then dinner and then parting. So right next to Asa is Diego, who is the church planner from Ecuador. And then his wife is on the front row wearing the orange and holding the books. Her name is Gabby. and she told our contact who set all this up. I debriefed with him this past week about our trip and how it went, and he said, yes, Gabby asked me, why did you only give them to me for 2 days? Why do we only get them for 2 days? She was like, well, they need to come back and we need to have them for like 3 weeks, you know. And so she was already planning everything that we could do. He shared some of that with me and what they were thinking, and so it's always nice to hear that we've been a blessing and not a burden, and that we're encouraging and helping those that we've gone to serve. Do you have anything? So the next day we began at the second orphanage, which is Hogar de El Alba. They were celebrating their 199th. They were celebrating their 99th anniversary, so they started in 1924, the day that we were there. And I did some research because there's a big statue of a guy right behind where Ace is standing, and I looked him up. He actually moved to Argentina when he was 8 years old with his father. His mother had recently passed away, and so they moved there, and he spent his whole life there, basically. Was an itinerant Presbyterian preacher or lay preacher, never had any theological training, but he was very invested in the poor children of Buenos Aires, and he started many schools for them to help bring them out of poverty, and of course invested in their spiritual training as well. So this home, the one you see behind them, they're not the one behind Asa, but on the right side of the picture, that's the original big structure where everyone lived. They had separate dormitories. The guys were on the right and the girls were on the left. So it's a different setup now. They have homes. So the house behind Asa is 2 homes, kind of like a duplex, where they have children in those homes, and they have house parents, usually just a mother, usually a tia is what they call them. And when they get children, again, this is the same way, it's more of a foster care system, and so when they get children, if they are siblings, they try to keep them together in one home instead of splitting them up, and they definitely try to keep them together if they get, you know, adopted or something like that. So we spent a lot of our time here painting. So this is one of the houses that the children live in, and so you can see the difference between what was and what was after we finished. So we spent a good amount of 2 days painting at this one of these houses, and the children had all been moved out, and so you can see like there was like writing all over that one wall, and we covered all of that up. This is a video that I put together, there's no sound, but of everybody painting and just kind of the whole upstairs. We painted the entire upstairs, so you can see us working there in the hall, and then in 3 different bedrooms. So we were able to paint all of the hall, and then the 3 bedrooms. And then we actually started on the kitchen and living room downstairs. They didn't think we would get that far, but we did. And so that first day when the children were in school during this time, and they didn't get home until 4, so then we would do a children's program from 4 to 6. And when they got home and they gathered them all up for us to be in our program, he said, they're painting someone's house. And he said, whose house is being painted right now? And about 8 or 10 kids raised their hand. So it was fun to see like which kids were gonna be able to move back into the painted house. And they were all so excited. You could tell they were excited that they were gonna get a painted house. And then after he said that, one other little boy just piped up and he said, they're painting my house next. Which actually we weren't, but I guess he wished that we were. So this was a huge blessing for them also. We bought the paint, we bought the supplies, and then we provided the manpower to actually get it done. So it's always a huge blessing to be able to go in and do things that they're not able to do for funding or whatever the reason is. So he said, the man that gave us the tour the first day said that, you know, he said, we're always trusting on God to provide. And, you know, you get to those moments where you don't know where the next thing's coming from, and then all of a sudden our team is coming from OBU, you know, and that's a huge blessing for us. So that was really fun. We did have some trouble with the kids, so we started the program in this room that is behind where they're standing there outside, and it's very echoey, it's very big, it's very loud, and the kids are very unruly. And so the first day it was a little overwhelming. I've been in quite a few situations with lots of loud kids, and so I did a couple of techniques to get them to listen to me, And then I turned around and most of my team were just standing against the wall looking a little like stricken, and I was like, oh, I guess they're a little overwhelmed. And they talked about it later, like at supper that night. I was like, okay, so tell me about today. How was it? I loved it. Like the minute we drove onto the grounds, I was like, can I live here? Like I just loved the feel of the place, and I love orphanages anyway. So I loved all of it. And yeah, it was a little loud and rambunctious, but I was expecting it to be that. But when I turned around and saw my team, I was like, oh, they're not. This is a little much for them, you know. And then at supper when we were debriefing, nobody said anything, and I was like, so are you guys okay? And one guy said, I'm still just processing everything, so I'll have to talk about it later. and then one of the girls finally said, yeah, it was just all a little much, like the loudness, and she was like, I don't know how you handled them. She was like, I'm just gonna stand back here and watch Rachel do this because I'm really overwhelmed right now, you know. So we did have to talk through what we were gonna do the next day, and I'll let Asa share about that because I know.
Yeah, I was feeling kind of overwhelmed because as hard as it sounds, they were way more rambunctious than the previous orphanage. And the main thing for me was they weren't paying attention. I was like, well, if we can't get them to pay attention, then we might as well just be talking to each other. But we went back and we decided we were going to pray. And we were going to pray on shifts, maybe 7 to 10 minute shifts. And that made all the difference. I think everybody could agree who was there saw the difference in the kids. Just the power of prayer makes such a huge difference in that. I went out first and I just walked around, and I was told later that some of the kids were asking, like, what's he doing over there? And they were able to tell them and say he's praying. And that, I think that made an impression on them. And the atmosphere was just much more calm, which I was glad about because that was the day that I was giving my object lesson, and I was glad that they were able to pay attention to that. But you can just see the difference that the power of prayer can make.
Yeah, that's what this picture is here, is he's giving his object lesson on becoming a new creation in Christ. So he had pennies that were dirty, and then we would use this solution to clean them, and then they got to keep the penny. So he taught it to 3 different groups of kids that day, I think. But yes, the difference between the 2 days was night and day. And our translator, who was not in on our meeting about what we were going to change the second day, made the comment. He said that this is so much different. Like, I don't know what you guys did, but it worked, you know. And I said, well, we did make a conscious decision to separate groups a little bit so there wasn't so many people in one, but our main strategy was praying. And so I came up with 10-minute, I think it was 8 minutes actually. We covered the entire 2 hours, and once he got done praying, he went and tagged somebody else, and then that person tagged the next person, so that we had someone praying the entire time that we were there and working with the kids. So we hope and pray that it made a difference, that they actually listened. Some of those times you just have to throw the seed out and hope it hits somewhere. You know, you don't necessarily see any kind of like recognition or understanding of what you're saying, but maybe somewhere along the way it will make a difference and they'll remember. So this is what the first day, actually, we did bracelet making, and this was when some of our team was like super overwhelmed, but the kids really seemed to enjoy sitting there and making the bracelets, and then some of them went outside. Our last day was spent at Word of Life, which was about 2 hours away from where we were staying, so this was a long day of driving and then doing stuff here. So I love this place. It is a Bible college. And also has an intensive, immersive Spanish program, which they told us a lot about. 2 of our students would love to do their immersive program just to become fluent in Spanish. And then we did 2 chapel services for the elementary school there. And we also met with teachers. For me, working in the Go Center, this was a good opportunity for us to talk about and think about what it might look like to send some of our interns here, and ways for them to teach English. So definitely for me, I was talking with a lot of the teachers and understanding like how that might look moving forward. And then it was just a really fun day, just a really good spirit and atmosphere on the campus, but also just being able to see my team really come together. So we did skits in both of the chapel services. We did the Prodigal Son skit, and we had done it a couple of times before, but by time 3 or 4, your team really starts figuring it out and pulling in, and it was really fun to watch them do that. And then I was like, but now I'm sad because this is the last time we're gonna do it, you know? And usually if you're there for 2 to 3 weeks, by the time you get to the end of week 2 and into week 3, that's when you just have the most fun, because it's no more like remembering and trying to focus on what you just do it because it's so secondhand, you know, second nature. And so for shorter trips, that's always where it gets a little sad, because you're like, oh, we don't really get to that phase. But it was good nonetheless. We really enjoyed being there. Did you have? Yeah, so that's the last I have. We got up the next day and checked out of our hotel, did a few touring things, and then we came back home. So, do any of you guys have any questions or anything?
I may have missed it, but how many kids were at the second orphanage?
Second one, they had told us to expect 50, and I don't think that many ever actually came.
Let's say it's like 30.
Yeah, 35 to 40 probably, because they were very in and out. So it was not too structured. That was some of what made it hard to deal with, was the kids were just kind of on their own, and if they wanted to show up, they could, and if they didn't, then they didn't, or they would leave in the middle of things. So 50 lived there, yes. All ages, so anywhere from, I think, 4 to 5 up to 17, 18. So, yeah.
Were the church scholars there? That way they don't have a whole voting, and were they predominantly Catholic?
Yes, so Argentina is, they are actually one of the only nations that technically every citizen is a Catholic. So it's in their constitution that they are a Catholic nation, and so they say that every citizen is a Catholic. So our tour guide said that, I mean, our translator said that, he said, so even though I'm an evangelical, technically I'm a Catholic, you know, because it's just like part of their citizenship or whatever to be Catholic, which I've never been in a nation that's like that, but it's very nominal, it's very, yeah, not something that people actually facilitate or actually like invest in. It's just something they say that they are. This home was definitely a Christian home. It was harder to see the investment of Christian people in the children at the second home as it was in the first home. It was more evident in the first home, but we didn't really interact with the tias and with the house parents, so yeah, not really sure on that.
Yeah, I would say their national religion would be soccer. I think everybody worships soccer over there. I think I saw more soccer jerseys over those 10 days than I've ever seen before.
Yeah, even amongst the Christians, the evangelicals, the guy who set the trip up for us had told us before we ever went, he said, yeah, even for the Christians there, it's like you have Jesus and then Messi. So it was like, you know, it's very, very, very soccer heavy and very, yeah, a lot of, yeah, soccer everywhere. Other questions?
Is there any persecution there?
No, we could be very open in what we were doing. I would say the pastor of the Leiloir church that we went to, you could tell he was very concerned about the direction that their country is going in, very similar to here. They're very much pushing the homosexual and choose your own gender agenda, even as young as kindergarten in the schools. And so he would term it even more liberal than America, is kind of how he stated it to us. And you could tell that was a very big concern on his part, for what they're teaching in the public schools and what they're teaching to their children. Yeah, in those areas. But as far as I know, no persecution per se. Didn't even hear it in some countries you'll hear, like when we were in Romania, the Eastern Orthodox Church there persecutes the actual believers, and it's pretty stark and pretty regular. I didn't hear any of that about like in Argentina, so.